All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Can we still say that? Graham Coffey with Dawgs Central. And I think the one thing that Florida fans and Georgia fans do agree on, right? Like, no matter what way you want to say the name of the matchup, I live in Florida, and so I want Georgia to win this. But like I've always said, Florida.
Uh-huh.
No matter what way you say it, like everybody can agree on the actual name for this thing. Kind of like the Red River, right? Like the same thing there.
No, I mean, like this is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. If you are a Georgia or Florida fan who has ever been to this game, you know why. If you were like me and went to one of these schools and experienced this game as like someone in your prime debauchery years, you really know why this is called that. Georgia fans. This game is not an hour and a half from Athens like it is from Gainesville. So all of UGA packs up and goes on fall break and heads down to St. Simon's and Sea Island and all these, islands in South Georgia for the weekend. And, it turns into a big costume party on the beach, basically. So some of the most legendary party weekends I think that the kids have when they go to the University of Georgia happens at this game. So it is a unique experience for that reason alone.
Yeah. How big of an issue does going up against a coach that you've never seen? Like players are going to decide this thing, but there is an interesting wrinkle having a coach and a play caller in this thing that you've never seen before, because Florida certainly has talent and they've not played up to it this year. But I mean, to me, that's certainly the most interesting aspect of this game. So I won't bury the lead on this.
No, it's definitely an element. I thought it was interesting. We asked Kirby about that last week after Billy got fired. And, he made the point of like, I don't know how much you can wholesale change your offense in 2 weeks. But what we do continue to see throughout college football is that teams come off of having their coach fired and they play with like a renewed energy, confidence. Maybe it's a lack of pressure. I think that's certainly, something that could come into play here. So I don't know that it's that schematic, right? Like there's situational tendencies that you're not going to have a read on in terms of like, does this guy like to go for, 4th and 2? If he's on his own 40, like maybe he will in a game like this, right? Because what do you care? Like you're not, you're not you're not getting this job, right?
Right.
Like this is not an Edo LSU situation. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how Florida manages that. I think Georgia is going to be ready for onside kicks and trick plays, and there will, I'm sure, be some different looks that they give them. But if you're Georgia, I think you have to just kind of go back to like, if we do the right things, then we'll get the right result. And sometimes that may look like, our eye discipline better be really, really good because they're going to run a flea flicker or whatever the situation might be. But I think that's what you got to hang your hat on if you're Georgia, because you can get really lost in all the hypotheticals and still not have any clean answers on it.
With this, but I mean, Florida coming off a bye, 2 weeks to try and install stuff, or maybe not install, but just kind of change up things that we just talked about. Georgia coming off a bye as well. Backing up to before that, we talked about this a million times, so I hate to beat a dead horse at this point, but it very much always feels like if you're not getting that final blow on Georgia to put them out, then you're not going to get it. And Ole Miss just never could do that. What changed about Georgia's defense? Like, did Lane run out of bullets? Did Georgia do something different to be able to go on the run that they went on in the last like 15, 18 minutes of the game? Like what went right for Georgia defensively there at the end of that Ole Miss game? Because not a lot did before that.
I think that what went right for Georgia at the end of that game is that I felt like for a lot of that game, they were kind of stuck philosophically between like trying to be aggressive in certain ways defensively without really fully committing to it. And it's like, okay, like they gave up a 75-yard touchdown by putting 7 guys up at the line of scrimmage, like they were going to run some simulated pressure, but they put 4 guys back at the first down marker and gave 10 yards of cushion up. And it's like, no, like if you're going to roll cover 0 and blitz the house, then like you got to play press man coverage and you got to knock these guys off their routes, and you can't, you know, essentially create like a one-on-one in space for your opponent. And that's exactly what happened on that play. And Lane called it out and pointed it out, and boom, 75-yard touchdown. So I thought later in the game, it was kind of like, hey, you know, when we're gonna try to bring some pressure packages, we're actually going to bring our DBs up and get in the faces of these wide receivers and put hands on them as they come off the line. And I thought they did a better job of that. I thought the corners did a better job of staying in phase. And you know, I thought Georgia did some things on the defensive line in terms of some substitutes later in that game that kind of helped them get pressure. We saw Chris Cole, who's an inside linebacker, but really a kind of a hybrid player. He played off the edge more. Josh Horton came in and played kind of, you know, a three technique spot and got a little bit of penetration up the middle. Like they took out guys who I would call kind of more run stopper type players. And I think that's been a theme for Georgia's defense this year, is like they've sort of really swung hard towards, we're going to plug gaps and we're not going to let anybody run on us, and committed a little more to trying to get Chambliss off his spot. Did they sack him a bunch or anything? No, but like they started to move him off his spot, and it threw off the timing of things.
In this matchup, it does feel like, you know, we talked about just the game within the game of Gonzalez and different people calling plays that haven't called plays and just different things that are going on. A big part of this is going to be how well DJ Lagway plays. And that has been the story of Florida's season, is when he's played well, they've looked pretty good. And when he hasn't, they've just catastrophically failed. Just Florida's offensive line, I think, hasn't performed as well as many of us thought it would. I remember doing a fantasy draft, like just completely make believe, just where you had to pick like, you know, a quarterback, a wide receiver, two wide receivers, a tight end, a running back, an offensive line, a defensive line, and a secondary, and then a head coach. But you could only pick like two from each Power Four conference. Like you couldn't just go with all of Bama's roster or something stupid like that, or Ohio State or whatever. So anyway, I picked Florida's offensive line. Terrible pick, like through the first couple of months of the season. But I did have a lot more faith in them than they've played. A little bit better recently, but it feels like if you can move Lagway's feet at all, I don't think he's healthy enough to run, although I guess he just had the bye week. So maybe he's as healthy as he's been. But I think getting pressure after him against an offensive line that's been very up and down will be key. And obviously you want to get pressure on the other QB, but that feels like a big piece of this one. Hey, I'll get right back to the video, but first I do want to give some love over to Alumni Hall. If you're watching this preview right now, if you're enjoying the college football talk, I know you're a diehard. Make sure that you are stocked up for game day, for the rest of the regular season, for what's hopefully a postseason run for your team over at Alumni Hall. You can visit them in store or online at alumnihall.com. They have all the best brands that you could imagine. The biggest and best selection of game day apparel is at Alumni Hall. Use our code CFA15 for 15% off and put your order in at Alumni Hall, the only place you should be shopping for college football gear.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's, you know, their offensive line is, I thought, I think they've blocked the run pretty well this year in a lot of cases, right? It's just like, you know, the times where Florida's been able to pass the ball well enough to keep teams from loading up on the run is when I think we've seen them have success. And then the times where, you know, they haven't, teams just kind of eventually are like, okay, you know, we're gonna make you use a different weapon, and there's not another weapon for them to use. So I like what Florida has, you know, done in the run game. I think with Lagway getting them off the spot, yeah. I mean, like you look at where this offense is on third downs. I mean, they're 3.5 yards per play offensively on third downs. They're a 32.2% success rate offensively on third downs. That drops down to 22% when it's a passing play on third down. So like this game is very interesting because they haven't been able to protect DJ when everyone knows that he's going to have to drop back and throw. And Georgia hasn't been able to get pressure on quarterbacks when everyone knows that they're about to drop back and throw, right? So it's like, whose weakness is the strongest, kind of is my question going into this. Just we're talking about the SEC's worst third down passing offense in Florida going against the SEC's worst third down passing defense in
Mm,
Georgia. Um, you know, I'm always somebody that's going to kind of like defer to Kirby Smart when you talk about, hey, there's a problem defensively and he's got a bye week to fix it. I'm gonna guess, maybe it's not gonna be fixed entirely. Like, Trevon Walker's not walking through the door for this game or anything, but
right.
I think they'll have some answers on how to confuse him and how to get his feet moving. But I am curious to see, kind of what that looks like for Georgia. Because, I think the biggest thing for Georgia on some of these third down situations is it feels like the defense is kind of telegraphed a little bit sometimes pre snap. And, you know, they've played some of these offenses with Kiffin and Heupel and even Freeze, where like you've got the guy on the sidelines, the head coach is a good play caller who is going to point things out after the headset cuts off and make these last second checks. Where's Ryan O'Hara on Saturday? Is he up in the booth? Is he on the sideline? I don't know, truthfully. But with Billy not involved and really, Florida not being an offense that we're seeing, we haven't really seen them be one of those teams that like is kind of checking in and out very quickly. I'm curious if Georgia can disguise their formations and just sort of what they're doing defensively a little bit better. And I would expect them to give DJ a lot of different looks and not just kind of stay in base packages all the time, but try to like confuse him a little bit and just get him to not trust his eyes. Cause that's what I see with him sometimes is just when that first read's not open, he tends to drift even if he's not really getting pressured yet.
Before I go Georgia offensively, I do want to ask just about Jaden Ball. It feels like when they run really well, I was really high on him. I actually took him and their running back and their offensive line for my two SEC picks in that draft. And I will say that I felt like that's been a pretty good pick. Not that we've kept any stats or anything for it, but he's been super impressive. It's just kind of the commitment to actually running the ball that Florida seems to have struggled with this year. I know they've gotten down in games, and so they've had to kind of outthink themselves and throw the ball. Um, but Jaden Ball, Georgia's run defense up against him.
I mean, if there's one thing Georgia's defense has done very, very well, it has been stop the run. Um, like they've really not let anybody run on them. Alabama couldn't run on them. Ole Miss, I think 24 carries for 87 yards. They were very situationally successful, oddly so, honestly, where like a lot of their runs went for first downs, even though the long run they had in the game was like 11 yards on the final drive. But yeah, I mean, I like Jaden Ball a lot. I think he, should belongs in the conversation for best backs in the SEC. I think he's a really good football player. Um, how much help does he get? I'm curious to see. I look at this Florida team and sort of like where they make their money in the rushing game or where Ball makes his money on the rushing game, and it's a lot on the edges. With inline tight ends, he's getting 6.6 yards an attempt off the right side. So like Georgia, like we were talking about a minute ago, it's that balance, right? Of are you going to run your kind of pass rush guys out there and, you know, prioritize moving DJ around, or are you going to do what you've done all year and put Quintavious Johnson on the edge, put Gabe Harris on the other edge, and just set edges very, very well and kind of force teams to pass to beat you? I think in this game, I want DJ to prove he can beat me. I'm not going to try and let Jaden Ball, have any space that I don't have to give him.
Coming into the year, your expectations for Georgia's offense, have they exceeded that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, after that Ole Miss game, for sure.
Yeah.
I thought Gunner was going to be better than the national narrative was on him. Uh, I did a show with our our mutual friend Chris Phillips back in August, and we were kind of talking about SEC quarterbacks, and I was like, I know more about Gunnar Stockton than I know about a lot of these guys that are getting hyped. Like I've seen Gunnar Stockton go out and lead a comeback in an SEC championship game. I haven't seen Arch Manning do that, but I didn't think I didn't think he'd be as accurate as he's been, but B, I sort of thought, Carson Beck for Georgia was when he was good and when he was seeing the field well and not turning the ball over. What I thought he was really great at was his ability to kind of hit those like intermediate passes up the seams and in between the linebackers and safeties. And I thought Gunner, the trade off would be you lose that and you would get better deep ball accuracy. Uh, Originally that's kind of what was going on, but he has developed a very solid intermediate passing game. And once they got those tight ends involved against Ole Miss, you really saw him make some good kind of layered touch throws in that game. So, yeah, I think he's been very, very good. I think we expected the wide receivers to upgrade, but they've probably been a little more, plus side than I thought. They've made some catches that have been, not easy and kept chains moving and all that. Losing Colby Young like they did against Ole Miss is going to hurt them, I think, down the stretch. But the big emphasis of the offseason for Kirby was we want to run the football, get back to running the football, and they've run the football well against everyone they've played. Honestly, it hasn't always been like we're ripping off 12 to 16-yard chunks all the way down the field, but they've been very efficient at staying ahead of the chains, and I think that's a big reason why Gunner's had the success that he's had.
Florida's wideouts, obviously you're only going to do as well as your quarterback can place the ball, but they do have some studs in Dallas Wilson and Vernell Brown, and they've done a good job of recruiting that position. Their weapons are, certainly like if those guys were to stick around for a couple of years, you'd say, shoot, they could have one of the better wide receiver rooms in the conference and thus the country. We'll see how things shake out once they make a hire and all that. Vernell's a legacy, so I'd be pretty surprised if he left. But that matchup with Georgia's secondary, just thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a strong receiving core kind of across the board. There's enough guys that can make plays where I don't think you can really hone in and say we're going to take away this guy, right? I you know Brown has been really good. Sturdivant's a guy who Georgia recruited out of the portal, was interested in bringing in. I know they've got respect for him. Um, you know, it's hard not to like the Eugene Wilson season has been a little strange to me. Just as good as he was, uh, earlier in his career, I kind of been surprised that he hasn't been more productive. Like there's been games where he's not recording a catch. That's been a little bit strange just because I mean you go back to I think the 23 Georgia Florida game or maybe the 23 Georgia Florida game. I mean like he was their entire offense in the first 20 minutes of that game, kept them in that game. But yeah, I think Dallas Wilson's the one that really scares you the most. Just like there's guys who can get open deep and there's guys who can do a lot with the ball in their hands. It's rare to see a combination of the two. And I think he is one of those who like not only can he catch the 30-yard pass downfield and get open enough to make that completion, but he can make two more guys, he can shrug off two more on the way to the end zone. So that's the one that scares you for Georgia, especially with that Ole Miss game, they did not tackle well in the back end. And it's got to be a point of emphasis for them.
Before we predict this, I just want to get your thoughts. Where do you think Lane Kiffin ends up? Do you think he ends up in Gainesville or what ends up happening here?
I've gotten a little bit of like flack from Florida fans over this. Not that I said anything
No.
about Florida. Well, I did, I guess, tangentially, but I I said before the LSU job opened like weeks ago, and really before the Florida job opened, like I've told people I think that Lane is the perfect fit at LSU. Like LSU accepts and embraces kind of different personalities as their head coach, as long as that personality is someone who like really, is embracing the university and just what it means to be coach at LSU. And Brian Kelly never did that, but Les Miles did. Like I don't know how many places would have had kind of the type of, relationship with Les Miles that the LSU fan base did. Eventually it's soured, but most things is sour eventually in this sport. But I think Lane at a place like LSU, he would show up and like I don't see anybody getting stuffy and upset about the tweets and the trolling and like the hot yoga thirst trap pictures on game day morning, Like I just think he does this thing and everybody's like, hey, we're kind of, like Louisiana is it's its own place. It's a foreign country in many ways. And Lane Kiffin is kind of the same way as it relates to major college football coaches. Like he's unique, he's an outlier. He is college football coaching's version of you can get a daiquiri in a drive-through window, which is exactly what you can do in Louisiana. So I think that he would fit perfectly there. I'm not saying Florida's not a good job, but I do. He didn't leave for Auburn a couple years ago, and Florida has had more modern success than Auburn. They've won more national titles more recently and all of that. But I do think those jobs are similar in some ways. I think like you've got the in-state competition, right? That you've got FSU in Miami and Florida. In at Auburn, you've got Alabama, Louisiana. It's LSU or nothing, right? And I just think that like I've always ranked it as the first or second best job in the conference because of the amount of players that come out there and they all grow up wanting to go to LSU. There's not split households in that state. So uh, I just look at what he's done at Ole Miss. And really the reason he's been successful there is because he's probably been the most consistent portal evaluator in the country.
Yeah.
And so you get to continue being that, but you get the high school recruiting apparatus that can land top 5 classes consistently. Like that's a win-win. I just think it's hard for him to turn down, and I just think culturally he's a better fit there. And I know that Florida fans think they want Lane Kiffin, but my experience with Florida fans is that as soon as their coach loses a game, everything he does kind of gets questioned or becomes annoying to them or becomes a thing that is, something to scrutinize. And I just don't know, like, if year one is a rebuilding year and, maybe they go 9-4 and miss the college football playoff, like, I just think they turn the heat up so fast that that could be a combustible type of relationship between him and the fan base there.
Yeah. I think there's an argument that Lane's best decision would be to stay in Oxford.
You're right.
Just because of the expectations. Like you win 10 games a year at Ole Miss, like they'll build you a statue at one day, And I know Brian Kelly was a dickhead, like, so it wasn't just the on the field stuff. We won 34 games in 3.5 years, man. Like, you know how many programs across this country would kill for that? And I know that's not LSU's expectations. But even the way that Florida got rid of Mullen, I don't know that Lane's going to come in and recruit the way that, like, I don't think he's going to come in here and just stack top 5 classes. I don't think he's going to, I think he would do a lot of things well at Florida. But you're right. Like the expectations are so high there that can you win a national championship maybe a little easier at Florida or LSU? Maybe. We'll see if, an Indiana or a team like that can win it over the next couple of years at a place that hasn't typically had that kind of success. And I'll tell you, if Indiana would have like won it last year, if they'd had their team they have this year and won it last year, maybe that would make it a little easier for Lane to say, oh, I can actually win, at a place that hasn't won a title in, since desegregation or whatever, right? But I do think there's an argument that him staying there, like he could, if he was to go to Florida and win, right? Like he's still third in line behind Urban and Spurrier. If he was to go to LSU, he's still behind Saban and some of these. Like I think if he could get over the hump once at Ole Miss, like that would, less expectations, less pressure, be who you want to be. You're as big or not bigger than the program. Whereas going the other two, but all these guys are hyper competitive, and
Well,
I would understand if he did leave, but I think there's a pretty strong argument that staying would probably benefit him.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've thought about with Lane is like, will Walker Jones, the director of the Grove Collective, follow him
Yeah,
wherever he goes? Probably not. Walker Jones is an Ole Miss. He's a former Ole Miss player. But it was interesting. We over at Dog Central, we did an interview with Walker before the Georgia Ole Miss game, just because it's like, I think there's lots of people that are like, how did Ole Miss get good all of a sudden, right? And he Walker he worked for Jimmy Sexton, right? The power agent that
yeah,
represents Lane and Kirby and Saban and everybody else. But when NIL and the portal when that came into effect, like Kiffin called him up and recruited him to leave the agent world and come and raise money for Ole Miss, and did it with the belief that like this could be the thing that changed Ole Miss football and its entire place in the world. And he's been correct about that. He's the only coach to ever win 11 games in a season there. But I'm very curious, like, the NIL infrastructure piece of this, uh, I feel like we still don't account for it nearly enough when we talk about, one job versus another, right?
yeah,
And can you win here versus there, blah, blah, blah. Like, do you have money to go buy players? Like that's going to be the question. I think that Lane would like to have the money to keep the best high school players that he gets, because I think he's frustrated with that dynamic sometimes. I think there's a reason why we saw him. He was at the leading edge of the like, hey, we're not going to have a spring game because we don't want people to scout our younger players. So you know, I think he could stay at Ole Miss, have a successful career, be legendary there. But I also think it's hard not to look at some of these other schools that have just much more in terms of alumni and resources and
yeah,
fan support and the consistency of that support, and be tempted by it and wonder, is this the place? Because I personally think that like Lane Kiffin 3.0, the post Saban Lane Kiffin, the one who has kind of had this, epiphanic journey at Ole Miss that, is doing hot yoga at 6 a.m. and has his chi all worked out and doesn't drink and, you know, seems a little more like driven by the right stuff. I think that he's like just the management and the way that I see him respond to things and what he's doing with his program and the organizational leadership. It very much kind of reminds me of some of the things that we saw from Kirby early on when he got to Georgia, and some of the things we saw from Saban. Like, I think he's a guy that if he's in the right place, like he could be the next new coach to win a national title.
yeah. A couple other. I was talking to somebody else about this, but man, the ABC to get off a lane for a second, but the ABC lineup this weekend is ridiculous with Vandy, Texas, and then the cocktail party at 3:30, and then at 7:45 or whatever weird time ESPN starts games, which is never actually on time. With Tennessee, Oklahoma. Thoughts on that Vandy, Texas game quickly? Can Vandy do it again?
Yeah, they can do it again. I kind of wonder with a guy like with Pavia. I mean, God knows he's super competitive, and they played Texas really well last year, and that Texas team was better than this one. But at some point, does the load kind of start to add up on him, right? Like just being a quarterback and carrying the football in this league as much as he does it's a tough task. And I'm just curious to see sort of, is he starting to kind of run out of steam a little bit when you're talking about like, hey, we need you to go run QB power and pick up this 3rd and 2, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough push on the offensive line to run inside zone and go get it. Uh, I think they can do it. Texas. I would. I like. I'm sort of telling myself not to discount how important that win at Mississippi State may end up being for them. Like that might be the moment that this kind of younger team with a quarterback who's shown shaky levels of confidence at time, like they might start to believe. And I have my beliefs about Texas and sort of how they're constructed, and my general idea on Texas, to be totally forthcoming, is if you pay everybody on your roster who matters like 3 to 4 times more than the next school was willing to pay them, are they really motivated by the right shit? I don't know, but like as long as they're in the playoff hunt, I think they're going to keep playing hard.
Yeah.
If they lose that third game that knocks them out of the playoff hunt, then I could see them losing two more, and kind of like we look back and say they're front runners, but front runners do fine when they're out front.
Yeah.
So, I think that I lean towards Texas winning that game on Saturday, just coming off of, they kind of got a little life support, a little miracle last Saturday. I think they cash it in and win. And I wouldn't be shocked if they come to Athens and still have two losses, and that game becomes pretty well hyped.
Yeah. What about the night game? Tennessee at home against Oklahoma.
I need to see it from Oklahoma, man. I just like that Tennessee offense. It creates challenges. I like similar challenges to what Ole Miss creates, truthfully.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of similar principles there. Jeff Levy was a Bryles system guy. He was Lane's OC at Ole Miss when they were putting everything in. So yeah, I lean Tennessee there. When that offense starts clicking on you, it can be a lot to deal with when they can run tempo. Them playing at home is a whole different animal than them playing on the road. And I just don't really like, if you can't run the football in this league, then it's hard to win on the road. And
Yeah.
and Oklahoma has not shown they can run the football for 2 years now. And John Mateer, I know he had the hand injury and all that, but like even before that, I didn't really get it. I didn't really get after the Auburn game where it's like he's the Heisman front runner. And it's like, well, why? Because he threw a couple passes in a coverage that didn't get picked this week. At some point, aren't those going to get caught? So I've just not bought the Oklahoma thing, and maybe they'll prove me wrong, but I think Tennessee wins that, and especially the Heupel factor. Like, if he has any chance to twist the knife on Oklahoma, I can promise he'll do it.
Give me a score in this Georgia Florida one.
To be totally transparent, I'm still kind of trying to go through this game and wrap my head around it entirely. If I, there's the element of the new coach or the interim coach and all of that, and that would you can sit here and be like, well, like they're coming off a bye week, right? So they have they have 2 weeks to put in like whatever they want and all that. I think the flip side though is like Georgia also gets 2 weeks. Georgia's healthy, probably healthier right now than they've been since the start of the season. There's you're talking about a Georgia team that like I think offensively is sort of hit a spot now where you've got full trust in Gunnar Stockton, and instead of being a team where it's like, hey, like we need to just run the ball and kind of play things close to the vest, like you can open it up now a little bit, and you can maybe get aggressive earlier in games and try and go get a lead. And so I expect Georgia to try and kind of get up early and see if they can just like knock the wind out of Florida's sails a little bit. And I think that dynamic could be at play. The flaw for me a little bit in the logic of like Florida's going to come out and look like a lot of these teams do after their coach gets fired is it's playing hard has not been Florida's problem. Like they played hard for Billy. They played hard for Billy last year, right? So
Yeah.
there's part of me that wonders like how has this all been received in the locker room with a guy like DJ Lagway who like we've all known, I think DJ, Billy's the reason that DJ's at Florida, right? So I, I'm curious to see how this looks truthfully. Like, I'm not sure that firing him. I think he had to be fired eventually, but it's not like Lane Kiffin was going to pick up the phone the next Monday
Right.
and say, "I'm coming right now." Like, I don't know if it was the best thing for them to finish their season, but I look at Florida, and Georgia's been a good first down defense, and they've struggled a lot on second downs. And so, their third down numbers look bad because teams get into 3rd and 5 or less a lot against them, and those are fairly easy to convert. But when they get teams into like 3rd and 6 plus, Georgia's actually been pretty good. I I think that, there's been a little more hands-on involvement, I think, with certain things defensively from Kirby over this bye week. I expect him to kind of, even though they had that big win against Ole Miss, I think the defensive side of the ball is probably going to play kind of pissed and like they've got something to prove, because they do. So I think they'll have a good defensive performance. I think Florida will have some tricks up its sleeve, some new scheme, and I think that could be worth anywhere from 7 to 14 points in a game like this. I just don't know on a down to down basis as it goes on. I think Florida's got a good defense, but their their pass defense, we've seen it kind of picked on at times against teams who have better passing games. I might make the argument that Georgia's probably the most well balanced offense that they'll have seen yet. I'm trying to think back, but I think that's fair. So I think it's a close game for a while. And then, Georgia, kind of like we talk about all the time on here, like, maybe Florida gets a lead at some point, or maybe it's a one possession game, or back and forth at certain points. But I just think, the I don't know how much belief Florida has right now. And I don't know that firing Billy is going to necessarily give them more belief. I think it might work oppositely. So I think Georgia kind of pulls away in the second half and wins this thing sort of, you know, comfortably, I guess. I am going to say that it's a 34 to 23 kind of game, or 34-20, somewhere in there. Like, I think Georgia covers the 7.5, 8 point spread.
Yeah, I was kind of in line with that. I was thinking 30. Yeah, almost exactly 34-21 was what I said earlier in the week. And so I'll stick with it for now. I know folks can follow you in all of your work over at Dawgs Central, but just tell us a little bit about that before we go.
Yeah, dogcentral.com. If you're a Georgia fan or someone who is, interested in the inner workings of the Georgia football program and Georgia athletics in general, like, we're the spot. There's a lot of outlets that cover UGA. That's what happens when, teams have success like Georgia's had under Kirby. I think where we excel is that we do more kind of in-depth levels of content than anybody. I think our game preview and game review stuff is second to none in terms of just the levels of detail and the accuracy of the predictive analysis. And I also think that we have a wonderful community of people that are there to talk about sports. So if you find yourself like tired of kind of the message board experience of, hey, I've got to click through political takes or, off topic crap to try and glean a little bit of insight or a little bit of football conversation, you may be the perfect Dog Central subscriber. So come and check us out. We'd love to have you. Just posted a bunch of notes from Georgia's Monday and Tuesday practices, and stuff in there that you're not going to find in public domain.
Cool. Graham, I appreciate it a ton. We will certainly have you back soon, and man, good luck this weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks, TJ.
Hey, just very quickly as we wrap up this video, you have days left to get your free play on Sleeper. The free $20 entry expires at the end of October. If you're seeing this on game day, you may have already missed it. Make sure that you use our code CFA for a free $20 play over on the Sleeper app. You can click the link in the description to get that. You won't even have to fill the code in. It'll be ready for you. And when you log in, it'll be right there. Sleeper app, CFA, all you got to do, free $20 play. Go check them out.